Welcome, everyone. Today, I have the privilege of having Tricia Carr with me. Tricia is a medium, energy healer, and an animal communicator. So welcome, Tricia. So good to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Shae. This is really, truly an honor.
Well, for us as well. I'm looking forward to talking to you about some really important and interesting topics today in this whole ascension process. Maybe just start with like a little bit about your history and how you've come to do the work that you're up to today.
Okay, great. It's interesting. I didn't realize until afterward that my personal awakening and, the big opening of my ascension process really does align with the global energies for it, because it really happened. My pre-awakening kind of aligned with the 2012. It was actually like late 2011. And so that's pretty interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people could look back at their history and see that as well. For me, I came into the knowledge that I am an empath, and that sort of blew the lid off of everything for me. I was definitely, when I was younger, I was a spiritual seeker, and the only way I knew to do that was through religion, through evangelical Christianity. And I thought that I was spiritual and not religious, but turns out, I actually did bump up against the religious part of it, the boundaries and all of that kind of stuff. I started to become uncomfortable with those restrictions, and so tossed that out when I was probably 19 or 20, I think it was. And then from then, I was just really kind of, for self-therapeutic kind of seeking, really trying to manage my sensitive self. And I actually tried to manage it by being more pragmatic, as I thought, and also through physical movement. I became a really avid runner, and that was a sort of very moving meditation for me, and did a lot of healing that way. And then at some point, I did stumble upon Dr. Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, and that started to really open up my consciousness in a very more subtle way. I started trying to figure out how to meditate. I actually would still pray in the language that I was comfortable with before, because I was sort of like, well, it's not going to hurt. And I did have some real spiritual growth in the Christian church. And I guess in those prayerful moments, that was very meditative as well. But when I came to learn that I was an empath, it was because I was discovering my life was really great, and I had a great job, great husband, and wonderful animals. Yeah. And I was just discovering that I was waking up in the morning really with thoughts that weren't my own, because emotions that weren't my own, and I would like kind of lean into them and say, what is this feeling? And then they would articulate into a thought that I didn't identify with. And there was none of my previous experience included any kind of worldview that was, about psychic gifts or intuitive gifts in that manner. What in the Christian church, there were the gifts of the Spirit, which, obviously are intuitive gifts, but we were always taught in the different churches I was in, for the most part, that those were from the early church, and that they're really not for us. And certainly they weren't as, I guess, widely embracing of them. There's always an authority in the church, always an outside authority. Even though I did dabble in a lot of my practice in the Christian religion was in the kind of, what do we call them? Charismatic churches. Uh-huh. But they were still very restrictive about what kind of gifts they were, and how they had to be utilized, and you could be wrong, and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so when I was discovering that I was waking up with these thoughts that weren't my own, I thought, well, why not go to a psychic? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it won't hurt. Again, it won't hurt, because right. I had gotten to the place in my life where I trusted my mind and I trusted myself. And I actually booked an appointment with a person that I found on Yelp who had really great ratings. And of course, I went to her website, and she looked lovely and, felt lovely. And I booked a 15-minute session with her, and it changed my life, just a phone session. And actually, her name is Laura Powers.
Interesting.
Yes. And the first thing she told me was, well, you're an empath, right? Like, she just assumed I knew. And I said, I don't know what that word means. And she said, oh, hold on. And like checked in. And she's like, yeah, I'm getting that you're an empath. And explained to me, an empath is someone who feels other people's emotions as though they are their own, as though they are genuine to them. And I'm sitting here on the phone with this woman, and I haven't even like finished hearing the resonance of the words, and I just started bawling cathartically because I'm not crazy, you know?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So that blew the lid off of everything. And then after that, that kind of step 2, seeking, you know, just curiosity and just starving for all kinds of information. And the first kind of active gift, because the first part of understanding I was an empath was just learning how to be healthy. And the first active gift I uncovered was animal communication. And that was amazing.
Wow.
I'm going to pause there so I don't keep talking internally.
Well, we can keep talking, but I also want to reference back to a couple of things you said there. One was within the Christian church. I'm curious because I think when you're talking about those more charismatic religions, I've only been to 1 or 2 services like that in my life, but I think this is what you're talking about, because this is basically more with the speaking in tongues, right? Which is the Holy Spirit coming in and through and affecting us, which it just strikes me as very interesting that's what, as psychics or empaths or sensitive or communicate, that's what's happening. So, but yet it's in this context of a certain religion. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but that's interesting how it's acceptable here, but not there, but it's the same thing.
I know, exactly. And I actually fairly recently gone back and looked at the passages that Paul wrote about the gifts of the Spirit. And it's absolutely channeling is what it is. And so they have, it's interesting. They're in the churches that I landed in and had the most growth and connection in. There were a few ways. So they're speaking in tongues, and that would happen spontaneously in a worship service. And then there had to be, in this one particular church, there had to be a translator. And so that's a different gift, being able to decipher the tongue, the message that was given. And this was one of the times that I was like exiting. It was like have each other?
Oh, you dropped out for just a second though. You said this is one of the times I was exiting, and then I lost you.
Yeah, one of the points that was causing me to want to exit the church. So I was in the service, and this person delivered a message in tongues, and we sat there, and there was no interpreter of the message, no one to actually read the tongue and explain it. We sat there for a minute, and it didn't come forth. And so whoever was leading the worship service stood up and basically not really harshly, but still kind of shamed the person who gave the message of the tongue, because he said, well, if there's no interpreter, then that means you just did that out of vain. And that was just basically your ego that caused you to do that. He said it more softly than I'm saying, but that was clear. That was what his judgment of was it up. And I was like wanting to raise my hand and say, what if there's a person who's getting the message and they're being too afraid to deliver it? You know what I mean? Like, besides the fact that it was all these rules, and it's just like proof that. And of course, we understand now that just emitting the frequency alone in a tongue of the angels would be an energy adjustment. You know what I mean? Like, we could feel that, and we wouldn't need the utterance to be translated into our language. You know, so I see it was just that there was a leader who was saying, you know, you have to do it this way and you can't do it that way. And, but it's definitely channeling. And in that, you know, I felt people really feeling it, but then I don't know, you know, it was just, I couldn't get on with the rules, not to mention obviously the other rules about if you don't believe in, you know, accept Jesus into your heart as your Lord and Savior. And I was like, well, there are other cultures that they have a different version of Jesus. And well, you know what, God has made it available to them. And if they don't renounce whatever false idols that they have, and then take this specific path, then they're going to hell. Anyway. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This one point is a whole hour or much more in itself, right? I mean, and it's so important because the first thing that came to my mind was the difference to me in religion and spirituality, just to make it very simple, is, well, one of the things, but it's really that in religion you need a middle man usually, right? There's like the interpreter or the priest or the whoever it is, the pastor, to connect with God and the higher source and spirit. And spirituality is this one-on-one direct knowing. And in fact, it's who we are. in our essence, in our hearts, is this divine splinter of God, or however you want to say that. But there's no need for interpretation. There's no need for doubting or restricting or rules on that. And I really think that's a major fundamental shift in what we're seeing right now with everyone, is just that direct connection with spirit.
I agree. And like I say, that was quite promoted in the churches that I went to, is you have a personal relationship with God, and you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that was very much, promoted. And so that's why I did have a lot of spiritual growth, because that was also supported. And, but, I think that, what really turned me on so much when I started this new kind of spiritual seeking after my big metaphysical opening was the people that I was fellowshipping with, people like you, and then just other people that I was attracting into my life. They would say, well, I don't know anything. I'm not going to claim that I know anything. This is my experience. And like, they just kept turning it back around. Well, I've heard this, and that this is going on, even if we're talking about like our global ascension, from the pulpit of Christian churches. It was used fearful, to condemn us and to frighten us. And that never really worked with me. It didn't scare me. I was like, well, wait, so you're telling me we're going to have Armageddon? So at some point I'm going to die? Well, what difference does it make then? You know what I mean? Like it just didn't work. So even the people that talk about our ascension, it's just kind of like the kind of leaders in it, they talk about, yeah, but you don't have to do anything. Just keep trying to raise your vibration, keep trying to be more loving, and that's it. And I'm like, oh, I like that.
Yeah, so much simpler, right? I mean, it's really about coming back to our own hearts and self-love, so then we can bring more love into the world, to whether it's people, animals, the Gaia herself. I mean, it's about expanding into this love. And yeah, there's a lot there with just again, this is really simple and fundamental, but it's the basis, I think, the fear and separation versus the love and unity. Yes. And so there's love and unity within every religion, I believe, and in the history of it. And it's been watered down or distorted to one degree or another, within different churches. And so that fear and the whole thing about the fear and separation, that to me couldn't feel more wrong. Absolutely. On every level, and that restriction is not who God is to me whatsoever. So I think I just wanted to make that point there. I mean, I've never felt right with that,
I agree. Yeah, completely.
Yes. Okay. Well, yeah. So I think we're connecting in more and learning the love that we are, and all the beauty and the miracles and the wonder that are spoken about too. For me personally, the more I'm connected, the more these things just become part of my life and become more normal, and the joy and all the rapture and all these things that the Bible can talk about, I'm actually experiencing them more and more now as I am connected directly to Source. And so I think, and it's not only me, I think, a ton of people are going through this. This is part of the Phoenix Rising. It's part of the ascension process. It's just coming into our own and coming into the fullness and the more expanded versions of who we are. And this is love to me. In the end, it's love. So what are you, how do you see with your clients and in the work you're doing? Are you seeing echoes of this? Anybody else saying the same thing?
Yes, definitely. It runs the gamut of people. So I work, of course, I always attract extremely sensitive people. And so I have clients that are in all phases of it, where they're feeling that burden of the world and of their sensitivities, and feeling being disempowered and victimized even by their gifts. I mean, their gifts don't feel like gifts right now. And so sort of having to peel off some of those layers and get them some empowerment. And that through what I love is working with the people that, what you were just saying about the rapture of life and, the more connected we are, I love working in that area as well. I mean, of course, I love working with every level, because I know that any level of person that I'm attracting is a level that I'm being told to work on for myself. And so that level where people are experiencing life, where miracles are really normal, and it's our birthright. That's exciting. That's when it gets, the reason that's exciting for me is because we get to be very intelligent about it then.
Yes.
And we get to like be enraptured, but we also get to be really articulate and, you know, use our brains and stuff. And I think that's really fun. And that's actually something that I'm teaching about a lot, because I think that when we start out, we're seeking the miracle and we're seeking the thrill. And it's unfortunate if we stay there. And there's a lot of people, whether they actually have a big kind of opening, you know, like a big awakening or not, there are a lot of people that could just continue to seek that. It's almost like seeking a high. Mm-hmm. And that's a stasis to me. Mm-hmm. And being able, because I think that, you know, the universe is like, oh yeah, that's a miracle. So what? Like, that's your birthright.
Right.
Big deal. Like, now what? And now what? You know what I mean? Every day should be like your birthday. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely am getting people and people also realizing that, oh, I've had those big, fantastic moments. And then you go on along and then it's status quo and it's time to do a little shadow work again.
Exactly.
And all of that. And, when that stuff is coming up, you're just getting rid of that karma. You're getting rid of all of that's dragging you down, just so your vibration can raise and lighten and expand. And that's how we're all ascending. That's how we are. This is the ascension process.
Yes, absolutely. And you said something with, just going after that high all the time. That brings to mind the term spiritual bypass, which is a phase, a stage, a degree of this that I think all of us hit at some point for a while. And again, it's how it should be for us at that point. So no judgment around it, but it only gets you so far. Mm-hmm. Like you said, the stasis. And there's got to be that, it's like the infinity spiral. I always reference this because to me, that's like our spiritual growth. We may come back around to a similar pattern, but we're always ascending. So yes. But to do that, you've got to work with the shadow at any given point, whatever's coming up. That's the other side of that spiritual point that you're at. So otherwise you just stay in that one level and you don't really do the work necessary to keep, making that genuine ascension happen.
Oh, I so agree. I just did a little video on my YouTube channel that I didn't say literally spiritual bypass, but I think it's a part of the same cycle that, our ego starts to try to take over and manage our spiritual practice for us. Mm-hmm. And it's cyclical, it's natural. And it's because, we have some kind of big burst of inspiration and some new level that we're ascending to. And then that becomes normal. And that's when the ego wants things to stay the same because the ego wants to keep us physically alive. Right. And if we haven't died yet, don't change anything. So then the ego goes, oh, okay. So when we let it be quiet enough so that our intuitive mind can lead us to that new height, then, at some point we start to even out and the ego's like, yeah, this is great. Oh, good. This is part of surviving. This is physical survival. So keep it this way.
Exactly.
And then we do start to, or, it does that, or it starts to get in there and say, we're doing so well, we don't have to meditate as long, or we start to guard our beliefs, which is not a good idea because how we got here was being flexible and allowing our beliefs to be fluid. Or we, or judge other people's beliefs because they don't resonate with us. These are all ways that I think is spiritual bypassing is the same thing, and like I say, it's cyclical, so it's okay. And hopefully it becomes more and more subtle. And because we catch it earlier in the process because we are literally becoming more enlightened and we're more aware of it. But yeah, it's something you kind of do. The spiritual bypassing is something that happens really harshly when we're having the big awakening. Because, for example, the moment that I learned that I was an empath, I was relieved. And then the very next thing I felt was victimized. I felt like someone had just told me I had cancer. You know what I mean? I was like, well, then how do you live this way?
Yes.
Yeah. And then right away, I was already, my guides, I've always been in contact with them. They're like, yeah, but nothing just happened to you. You just learned something about yourself. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
I didn't just get into a car accident. It's just, this is your life. I was like, oh yeah, okay. But yeah, spiritual bypassing is something to pay attention to. And even talking about, when we talk about ascension symptoms, not that they're not real, they are real. But I think we can sometimes, when we're paying too pay too much attention to something like ascension symptoms, we're doing that thing where we place it outside of ourselves. We're trying to refer, and it's like, yeah, but you need to go back inside. You need to look back inside about what that's about, instead of saying, oh, the energies are crazy right now. So then you see how that's a outside, just like being in the church, you're referencing something outside and being a little disempowered. And again, not that it's not true, but it's still all about what's going on in you and what your soul is trying to bring, you forward with, whether it's releasing something of your shadow or learning something new, and having your beliefs be flexible.
Most definitely. So that harkens to the point of always checking in, learning the language of the body, learning your intuition, always being present with yourself as much as possible to interpret, because it's a feedback loop. I mean, and what's outside is a reflection on the inside and vice versa. So you've got all this going on. And sometimes it can, for me anyway, it can get mind-boggling, but that's because it's information that's beyond the linear mind. There's so much more. And that's part of us tapping into more of who we are too. It's like getting this information. It's the whole process. Again, as you go along more, it becomes more familiar and it's easier to navigate. So, but there's a lot happening. I mean, there's a lot happening. It's all interrelated. It's all like reflecting and coming back into your center, or my center, is always the way that I am most. And that happens in nature. That happens in any kind of meditation. That happens in an amazing conversation like this, where I'm synced up and we're really like in the moment and connected with this kind of energy. That really feels like home to me, actually. I mean, that's my center point. So it's so important, I think, for everyone to be able to go there.
Definitely. And my work with animals, and when people need help with their animal because there's some kind of issue. I mean, I actually have a lot of clients that just want to deepen their bond and understand how to hear their animals, or just to understand more about their animals. And that's great. But, obviously a lot of people come to people like us because they have an issue. So when I work with people with their animals that have issues, it's always the animal. No, I shouldn't say always, because the animals are individuals, but most of the time the animal is mirroring something for the person. Because the domestic animals that are in our life, they've come to really kind of be like a spiritual guardian to us, because they are closer to Gaia energy, which is that energetic signature is closer to divine. And so they understand their eternal perspective, generally speaking, better than we do. They develop and stuff like that too. So when they're babies, actually, a lot of times I have to, if they're having an issue when they're babies, I'm often like, hey, honey, so your guides, right? And they're like, oh yeah, that guy, when animals are young, I usually it's some counseling to help them to remember to connect with their guides and do their spiritual work as well. It's really cute. But yeah, our animals, sometimes when people with their animal is having some kind of physical symptom and they're mirroring something about the person, it's important to internalize that, because the animal is actually doing that. It's their joy. It is their purpose. So to deny them of that purpose would be, to deny them that great soul work that they're here to do with us. But, if they are manifesting, say, a UTI because we are, out of control in our emotional life, the animal, the best way to work on that is to go back into yourself, and that's going to help your animal.
I'm so glad you brought up the point about the animals, because I was going to ask you about that. As a huge animal lover and very connected to my own animals, and I grew up on a farm, so I've always had a special connection with animals. And yeah, it's such a natural part of who I am, and I think so important, because I mean, we're talking about relationship here in so many ways: relationship to ourselves, relationship to animals, other sentient beings, to our environment, to Mother Earth herself. And this is part of this expansion, this reconnection to our fellow inhabitants here, really. So let's talk a little bit more about the animals and the roles they play and what you see going on, because that's like one of my favorite subjects.
Oh, great. Yeah, I would love to. And, it's interesting, because I'm writing a book and about animals, and what animals teach me, nature as well. It's just kind of shorthanded to say it's animals, but the part of their perspective relates to density, and I know sometimes that So that's something I'm being counseled on, something I'm studying right now. And sometimes we use the words density and dimension interchangeably. So when I say density, and that's what this ascension about, it's about really ascending to a different density, a lighter density. And so animals, and it's not like cut and dry. Domesticated animals are much closer to us in density, but they still have that the slower density because they are closer to Gaia. And again, that Gaia energetic signature is much like the divine energetic signature. So, but the domesticated animals, and when I say domesticated, I mean the ones who have been biologically interfered upon by us. And so they are biologically domesticated. And this difference between domestication and wild is very interesting because it has to do, it's very similar to what I call the primal brain versus domestication. So with the primal brain or the primal mindset, we know if you have dogs or if you've ever had dogs, when a dog, they call it switching into a prey shift or a prey drive. If a dog can see a little chihuahua who's his friend, if he's a larger dog, running across an expanse, and he'll go attack it. Not because he's switched into this, I think it's even like your reptilian brain. It's that survival brain. And he's sort of lost that connection to his domestic understanding that that's his friend. Mm-hmm. And that's why they have big off-leash parks. They have the big dogs and have the little dogs because it can be just a little tricky. But density doesn't mean lower consciousness or lower awareness. And I think that that's something that even a lot of spiritual teachers don't understand if they aren't studying things the way that I am, spending so much time with animals. It has to do with and that density, it really seems to align with that access to the primal mind. And humans have this primal mindset as well. And often, and that's related to ego, and it's also related to the pain body. You could see sometimes, here's an example. If you saw some very wealthy businessman with a nice car and a suit, and someone stole his parking space, losing his absolute sanity, like he was being threatened. That's like switching into his primal mind, because somehow his ego or his pain body has been triggered and believes that he's somehow been really threatened, that he has to punch someone. That's a physical survival. That's a war response for a parking space.
I've seen that before.
Oh, haven't we all? And if he has time to have the argument, obviously he had time to find another parking space.
Doesn't make any sense. It's back here.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so, we know that there's, from the most expanded perspective, there is no judgment in the universe. All experiences are valid. And in nature, in wild nature, there's also no judgment. It's when there's, eating another animal or eating a plant. Plants are sentient as well. That it's about energetic exchange. And even though they have a survival drive, it's not, they also aren't they can handle their deaths better than us, including domesticated animals. Their survival drive is intact until the time that they're not, and they just, they release it. When our pets, our domesticated animals, are having a hard time with their death, it's usually because we're having a hard time with it, and we can't let them go. But their role is very similar to the role of all of our divine helpers, of our spirit guides, angels, non-terrestrials, all of that kind of stuff. And we're sort of getting this, this treatment from divine and from Gaia. That's how I see it. And not to mention the fact that our pets, when they pass away, they are a part of our soul group, and they stay with us. And in the spirit world, they are guides to us, some very primary guides a lot of the times. I often have dogs who have passed show to me how they're still guard dogging for their human, and they're like, I see something's going to happen, and so I go and I find someone to help, like in the spirit realm, like they go find an angel or something.
Wow.
But, yeah, they're definitely, I think they say that that a cat's purr and a dog's wag of the tail, that in those moments that their vibration is so high, it's so close to 528. Yeah, and they're generally, their vibration is higher than ours.
I just felt it as you mentioned that. It just went
too.
Yeah. Whew, it's like, that beautiful high vibration. I know, because I know when my animals, it's just a joy and a beauty. And when you look in their eyes, it's just like, it's so pure, right? It's so clear and pure, and it's such a beautiful. And you hear things about pets in the hospitals with people helping them heal. You hear about, petting a cat will help reduce stress. There's all these sort of things that we know, but maybe don't understand a little bit more about why they're working the way they are, and you're explaining it quite well with what you're saying there.
Well, they're natural energy healers. I mean, they're telepathic and they're natural energy healers. So sometimes when I'm speaking with an animal and they'll show me, they send me pictures. That's a lot of the way that that and emotions and vibration that translates into speech, like clairaudiently for me. That's basically how the information is. I translate, but it's interesting that they can actually get so precise in their vibration communication that they can give me a word that's unusual. So a lot of it is like kind of me feeling things and trying to translate it to speak with the person. But my friend, I was speaking with her dog, and he said to me, I have been her steed, which is an interesting, what I mean? Like, not a word I probably used in a long time.
Yeah, that's kind of ancient English, like the male horse, or I don't know if it's male, but it's that proud, kind of horse. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said, I can't believe that. I sit between him and his brother, her other dog, and say, these are my fine steeds. So they learn our language, they learn our verbal language. And so he's able to communicate that vibration to me so articulately that I said this weird word, So they're deeply intelligent. But what I was saying about them being natural energy healers is that an animal will give me a flash of how they've been sleeping on the person's, let's say on the person's chest, and they've been wanting to sleep on their chest. And that's because they're working on the person's heart chakra. And they're actually using their body to pull energy, lower vibrations or stagnant or whatever, to pull it out of the person. And it's like, they just give me that flash, and then I'll sometimes ask them why, and they'll give me an emotion, and then we can talk about what's going on with the person. And it's, they just, or like sometimes they'll see the animal like sitting at their feet, and I'll know that that's because they want to heal them from them being out in the world, how hard they're working, their contact with the world. And it has a lot to do with occupation usually too. And they're just, it's funny. I think that when people observe, even spiritual teachers observe them as having, when they're slower density, like being more between second and third density, that they think that they have less awareness. That's often what I hear, but it's not that. It's just that it's more natural to them. You know what I mean? It's not like, I don't go around thinking about the color of my hair all the time because it's just natural. It just happens. It actually is natural. This is my natural hair.
Case in point.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, or you don't go around thinking about how your teeth work. That doesn't mean you're unaware of them. It's just natural to you.
Right. And I think this brings up a great point about the definition of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Or sentience even. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because even as humans, we have IQ and EQ. Just because you're intelligent in an intellectual way doesn't mean that you've developed your emotional intelligence. So, yes. I mean, that's with humans, but that just to say that with animals, I mean, this is a very interesting thing to me because I think it's a, like you said, it's closer to Gaia. It's a different, like they don't have the cerebral cortex in front to filter through all of this. They just have a knowing and an understanding. It's interesting that the vocabulary came out in that reading with that one dog. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But I think it's just it's a respecting that it's a different kind of intelligence, baby. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think maybe we'd say spiritual or energetic or something like that. Because when, for example, that dog's name was Bean, when Bean told me I have been her steed, when I heard that, I wrote that down and repeated it to the person. When I asked, it was, if I asked him why, he wouldn't have given me a why. It's more like a feeling. But when I say it to the person was she said, so by the way, the other dog that she would sit between these two dogs, the other dog was passed, and he'd been passed for a long time, but she was so close to him. She was still deeply in grief about the other dog. So this is actually why Bean, the dog, brought up the steed thing, because he wanted to bring healing to that situation. Are we going to have a wordy conversation about it like you and I would if we were in talk therapy? No, but he's like, here's this. So it's, and again, because they don't do so much intellectual or mind gymnastics that we do, because they're way more present. If you think about him bringing that forward, because he has all of the feelings and the spiritual intelligence about it, then we can go do all of the wordy talky, non-present, past, forward, all around, and projection that we need to in order to get down to the presence, really.
Yes, which is interesting, because a lot of this spiritual ascension process is learning to be more in the presence, right? Which is actually learning to be more like the animals are. Isn't that something?
And like spirit is, because spirit is pure consciousness. And I see often when I'm working with higher densities. So I work also with the elemental realms and with the Devic realms. So the first time I met my Deva, one of my Devas, was actually a gnome and the gnomes are Devics, are like the Devas who oversee the earth elementals and the earth element. Mm-hmm. And so I never thought of gnomes being in any way real or anything like that. I've never been interested or thought of gnomes, and one appears in my meditation one day. And it actually came off of after me getting this really big education from a tortoise who explained to me some things about density, really, and which I didn't understand. And this tortoise, one of the things he had explained to me was, not to digress too much, but that he had been a stone. He had been a mineral in a past life. Mm. And so I just want to bring that up since we touched upon sentience. We work with crystals, and people receive direct information from crystals. I mean, there's sentience in absolutely everything. Everything is sentient. And science can't tell us that what is sentient and what isn't. If they tried, it's completely conjecture and theory. But so anyway, the gnome that I met, this Deva that I met, he was more 5D. I felt like between 4 and 5 density. And again, it's not like on a scale. But he came to me I was like asking him, what's your name? He didn't actually give me a name. Well, what's your message? What's the message? And it was just this presence that I couldn't even articulate. And it's because being of that higher density, pure consciousness, he has less personality. And it doesn't mean that he's not individual, which is the other thing. We think personality means individuality, autonomy, and all that kind of stuff. But that's another kind of dual thing to look at. Pure consciousness and personality, and the need for personality. If you're actually closer to the all, it makes perfect sense, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you're talking about this, because it's okay. So science and spirituality, these are starting to merge a lot more rapidly. Mm-hmm. So, and then I think quantum physics is that it's one of the main things that's allowing us to scientifically, cognitively understand a lot of the phenomena that we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. So then we're going into the different levels of density of frequency, really, because it's all energy. So we're talking about different levels of frequency. Right. And as you're describing the Devas and the tortoise and the rock and all of this and the animals, we're really talking about different levels of vibration and frequency that as I understand it, are existing simultaneously all around us. It's only a matter of us, for example, being able to understand and tune in to any particular level of that frequency.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason that we have this chakra system that we have is to help us to translate those different densities. So we're third dimensional or third density beings as humans. Well, inside of those three, I mean, undeniably, we have at least the second and the first dimensions. But densities, I mean, the first density is too dense for us to really be able to manage all the time. I mean, it's easier for us to have a conversation than it is to have a telepathic conversation, honestly, which is natural for us. And that's more in the fourth density. So, it exists all around us all the time. I mean, there's no separation. Everything is simultaneous. Everything is the all. But we need patterns, and we need organization, especially from this perspective of duality, of separation.
Yes, that's great the way you explain that, because it's really putting sort of a format around something that otherwise is, it's kind of hard to put vocabulary to sometimes, or even understand the experiences we have. And I wonder about, so you talked about the 3D, and again, this is the ascension part of what we're going through. Another way to look at this would be our 5 senses, what we've typically been. I mean, we come in with much more than that. We come in very connected, but then we're very quickly socialized, and we kind of, I think, ground down and limit ourselves into these, mostly five sensory expressions. And now part of this is coming out of that. I mean, how many we have, I don't even know. There's, I think, probably infinite along the path, but that's part of this Phoenix rising thing too, where we are ascending more into knowing and understanding in the 6th, 7th, 8th, and on and on and on with who we are. And again, that's about vibration and density. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if you have anything. I mean, I'm sure you have a lot more to say about it, but I just wanted to bring it in that context of what we're experiencing here, going from 3D to 5D, which is something you hear quite, at least in my world, quite commonly right now, is like going into this higher dimensional state.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And me too. It's something that it is kind of interesting how I wasn't quite ready for that study for the first bit after I had my awakening, the study of this ascension process. And partly because when I first heard it after I had just opened, it was reminding me, I still had some wounds. I still had some shadow work to do about the church stuff and about, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, don't tell me there's an Armageddon part of this spiritual stuff. Right. And so I was like, oh, don't tell me that. That's so annoying. It's just a person pattern. But anyway, but it's not anything like what I, went through in the church. But yes, as we do ascend, we become less dependent. I think it's really it's this dependence. It's not that the physical senses or the physical experience is less valid or less spiritual even. It's just that we have been restricted. We have a dependency on it, and we have this restricted view about it. And the non-physical, like non-physical communication or telepathy. I mean, I practice that and study that a lot. And that is something that we're going to be utilizing more. I mean, 5-dimensional, and again, it doesn't mean that we will abandon it. Animals are telepathic, but they don't abandon physical and verbal language because that's a part of the experience. But it makes more sense that we would do something that's more efficient, which is non-physical, because it's faster. You know what I mean? Being able to manifest instantaneously, and just being able to get comfortable with and trust ourselves enough with the fact that we can manipulate energy. And we're afraid of that because we still do just have that's too much of that separation. We don't realize that service to others we have that nature perfectly intact with us. So we aren't dangerous if we are able to manipulate energy or able to have a telepathic conversation. I've actually, I teach telepathy and talk about telepathy, and I've heard plenty of people that are like, teachers or something like that, leaders, at least they're leading Facebook groups that are, and they caution against it, and about teaching people telepathy because they think that people are just going to probe all the time. Do and violate people's boundaries. But I truly don't think that. I think that, first of all, we are telepathic anyway. And so that means that we have a tool we aren't intelligently using and consciously using. And I don't think that it's any different than physical behavior either. You know how to stay out of someone's personal space. You know how to look at their Facebook profile that's public, or to go and hack their Facebook profile and look at the personal. I mean, we know the difference. And if we looked at it more deeply and consciously and talked about it intelligently and then practiced it intelligently and consciously, then it will actually help to release any of that shadow. It'll help us to confront it, at least. If we have any, shady intentions with it, I think the best way to bring out those shady intentions is light, obviously. Yeah. But the telepathy and non-physical work of all kind is something that we are moving toward. That's what I see happening too, and that's what I feel in my own journey. And when you talked about that, I thought of integrity and accountability being so key in what you were saying. And these are things that I think naturally come with the spiritual awakening process too. Sooner or later, we really come across situations that teach us how to be more integritous with ourselves, our words, our deeds, our actions, everything, because that's really about alignment, right? And so any misalignment is not going to feel good, and it's not going to bring, desired results. For example, the universe will show us very quickly,
I mean, we have the choice always, but sooner or later, I think people get tired of pain and suffering. And so they navigate away from that, which is more in alignment with our true power, our true selves, and love, basically, again. So learning that integrity and that accountability for our actions and what we do is so, so important. So as we learn that and become more solid in that understanding, the idea of crossing boundaries, like you spoke of, I mean, it just, to me, that just is not in question. I would never even want to do that.
Right, exactly. And the field will correct us when we do that. So even if we did cross someone's boundary and do a probing, you actually suffer from it. I think, first of all, their suffering is their own choice. They have free will, to align with it or not. So really, you're definitely going to harm yourself, and the field will correct you back that way. And you will definitely feel it. And I love that you said integrity, because the word integrity, that's the root for, or integral, integrating, that's unity, that's recognizing the one. I'm so sorry, my little kitten is yelling. Come inside then. Can you hear her?
I can hear her. No worries.
There's no option, because if I hit her, and the only other option would be to lock her in a room, and that I don't want to do that.
No, you don't need to do that. Earlier in one of my videos, I've had each one of my cats make a cameo in my video, so it's all good.
Yeah. So sorry, what were we talking? Where were we before Delilah interrupted?
Hi, Delilah. You were saying that so well. Integration. You were bringing it to the point of integration and alignment. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that, again, that alignment, all of that, it just goes again to the one, to the all, to unity, to unification. And that's what the ascension process does. If we're moving toward 5 dimension or density, then we are becoming more expanded and lighter and higher frequency. And all of that is about being integrated, about being unified.
Exactly. And anything that is not of that same vibration really stands out. I mean, to me anyway, it's like an allergic reaction to it energetically.
Oh yeah. I like that.
Yeah. So, absolutely. And it's uncomfortable, so you just, and I think as we go along and have these experiences that reflect that more and more to us, it just becomes clear. And it's like, oh, that's that again. Okay. I stepped away 5 minutes sooner than I would have last time when I did it. It's like, like little bits and steps and stages with all of this, but you really start to pay attention and notice what's happening. And then you just decide something else and come from, a place of a higher vibration somehow.
Right. Absolutely. And it's also, what I think, I feel like mentioning right now is that when we talk about ascending and maybe, having less personality and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't negate our individuality. And that's something that the ego starts to complain. I remember my ego asking that question when, earlier in my awakening process, where it was like, wait, because I caught on to it. I was like, wait, if I raise my consciousness, then I'm going to be more connected, and then I'm going to be more service to others, and then I don't need, much individuality, and it's the ego dying, literally. And so it's kind of it's a struggle going down a little bit, but it doesn't negate it. It's, in that, we know that, at least we have heard, I'm sure everyone listening, there is no separation. We're all one. This is just God knowing, oneself by an opposite, just understanding, expanding by contrast. So I'm an individual right now. However individual I am does not negate the fact that all is one. We just have, these different perspectives. Sometimes we get a little hung up on moving forward because we're afraid that some contracted perspective negates the higher, or the higher negates the contracted, is actually what we're more afraid of. You know what I mean? Like we say that there are no accidents, or that that there is no judgment in the universe. And someone in their pain might say, what are you talking about? How could harming a child not be judged? How could that not be wrong? And it is, in this contracted perspective, it's not negated by the fact that in the higher perspective, there is no judgment and all experiences are valid.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I love that you brought up again about the ego, because I think people going through this awakening process to different degrees will continuously come upon this kind of threshold. And what I mean by that is, for myself, I had a very milestone kind of spiritual awakening experience in 2014. Mm-hmm. And the basis of what happened is that my ego fell away. Oh. And it was terrifying in that moment.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think I've had that. Yes, I've felt that before. It's interesting. My big thing was in 2014 as well. So
really? Interesting. I think mine was in September.
Mine was December. Actually, something did happen in September that catalyzed the December thing, the December reading that I told you about. But yeah, sorry, go ahead. I want to hear more about that.
That's interesting. Well, the thing was, I was actually in school and the second year of grad school, and my intention was to surrender. I put that out there, and to reconnect and re-honor my divine feminine self. And be careful, and I don't mean that in a scary way, but just be aware of what you ask for, because it will happen.
I know.
And I thought that meant like writing a book on the divine feminine, or just doing a seminar, something outward, like masculine doing. Well, the universe had a whole other thing in mind, and I got what I asked for, and that was my intellectual brain really went down for almost a year, where all that I had relied on in terms of my intellect, to be academic, to do schoolwork, all these things that my ego had crafted so carefully to be loved, to be accepted, to be okay in the world. That was my persona. Like, if I could be that smart and do all these things properly, then I'd be okay in the world. And that's what happened. I couldn't do the most basic things. And this was such a threat to my ego. And at one point, I just had this, I started shaking physically, and I had this force come in that was so powerful. And I'm usually a very strong and composed person, but this was way beyond my, it was so big. And I just was shaking, and my ego, I just kept saying, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. It's all I could think about, because I truly was terrified, because my ego was being dismantled. And so then after that, I shifted, and I had an out-of-body experience. I went to, into the oneness and the expansion and the colors and the symbols and the angels. And it was so beautiful. And I really saw so much and more, had the experience of much more of who I truly am. And after that, I came back in, but things haven't been the same since then. I'll just say that, but, and it was the most beautiful experience. But what I remember is that my ego was resisting, because it was terrified of being shattered, everything about the ego was to want to control, like you said, and keep us safe. And this was the antithesis of that,
Wow.
So people going through similar things like this, I just wanted to really define that, because so much about this is letting go and surrendering and trusting beyond the ego.
It is, right, because it's about being in flow, and my experience was not as full as yours. I just remember a whiff of that feeling before, where my ego was dying, or feeling myself separate from my ego, at least. It didn't fracture completely, I think, the way that your experience did, but I had this moment, and I was afraid. I was, you know what I mean? Like, what does that mean, and what happens now? And that's actually what I think I was referring to, that feeling when my ego was, when a big piece of your ego dies, it's scary, and you feel like you're free falling.
Yes.
And it's good, actually. But at first, when you're first free falling, you're like, but I'm going to crash, right? Because that's what your ego would have told you. But then that voice is gone, and then it feels weird. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm sure if you found this, speaking to the listeners, and just take comfort in the fact that it's okay just to go ahead and take a breath. And that, I know that sounds very simple, but as you were saying earlier, Shae, that, the very simple things that is actually the stuff. That's it. But taking a breath is expanding. So when you are feeling afraid, that's a contracted feeling. So a breath can actually help that. Because an in-breath is expansion, and it's an intention to expand above that contraction of the ego and the fear.
Yes, and there's so much that could be said about breath. I mean, physically, emotionally, spiritually, like you said. And it is the, quote me on this, but I think in Latin, it's called in spirito, because inhalation, respiratory, inhaling, inspirito it's in spirit. It's spirit. It's
Yes.
life. It's bringing that into our bodies and connecting with that part of ourselves. So as simple as and normal as breathing is for us, I think. Well, think about it this way: when we contract with fear, we're not breathing. We hold our breath.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the very
Exactly.
opposite is to allow that breath in the body and to fill ourselves with that. And that also brings us in, like we were talking earlier, like coming into ourselves, not being separate.
Right. And the breath is like, it's our most authentic state. It's, you know, the Bible says the breath of life. I'm sure there are other sacred texts that talk about the breath that way. It is the thing that makes us human, or the part where we become, existing in this dimension in the way that we are. And it is spirit. It is that, oh gosh, I just had this great message the other day when I was shooting a video. I heard it. It was almost physically clairaudient that the wind is the breath of life for Gaia. And it's very simple. It's very simple. I'm sure that that's been whispered in other people's ears, but it is. And I think the breath is also that great model of duality, and how we, you know, the in-breath, that expansion, literally you're expanding, is beautiful, but you can't stay that way all the time, and you need the contraction as well. And that's what this is all about. That's what we created as the universe, that we created the contraction so we could have the moment to experience the expansion.
I love that you brought that up. That is so perfect, the way that led into that point, because that's so fundamental too. The rhythms, right? Paying attention to our rhythms, Mother Nature's rhythms, all the rhythms, the ebb and the flow, the in and out, the breath. I mean, this is all, and what you said about expansion and contraction, it's all needed to be part of the whole cycle.
Yes.
Which is what this experience really is about, is that whole experiencing that whole cycle in these bodies.
And that's why when we do ascend to 5D, we are still going to have contraction. We're not going to be dead. We're not going to be non-autonomous. We're not going to be without personality completely. We're going to be able to experience it in a more profound way, because we have memory of where we have been. We're not going to lose memory. It's just, there's some things, like I say, we don't think about how our teeth work all the time, but we know it, and it's a part of our experience. We don't have to think about it all the time. And that's what I think a lot of the personality that we will be releasing, and ego that we'll be releasing as we're in 5D, it's still there. We're just not going to be paying attention to it. It's experience that we own. Energy can't be destroyed. So it's a part of us, but we get to move to new parts. We get to move to new heights.
Yes. And again, you said something that I want to speak to. I've experienced this in terms of my past history and timelines, in terms of, like, I know it's there and it's part of me, but somehow a lot of my past feels different to me now. Like it's a different quality where, you know what I mean? It's like, if I need it, I recall it, but it's like it's hard to put into words, but it's like this distance, but yet it's right here with me. But I have the sense that it's further away, or somehow I'm not as attached or identified with it as I used to be. And this whole time thing, I mean, that's a whole nother like discussion, right? The way it's all the different things, the nuances that are happening with perception of time. But that's one of them, like you said. And so when you said that, it's like, I know what you're talking about. I've been feeling that myself.
Well, yeah. And, time is an illusion. We understand that. Well, we don't understand it, but we know it. Right. But, time is an illusion. So time is simultaneous. So your past and your potential past are the same thing. And when you're in a different place from this perspective, your past has actually changed because you've chosen a different perspective reality. We're always channeling optional realities. We're always channeling them into reality because they all exist. So then if you choose a new reality from this present now, the history that is associated with that is also changed. It's kind of like, mind blowing, but
I get what you're saying though. I'm following you, and it is mind blowing, but But again, the more we begin to experience it, the more it's that other intelligence or that other way of knowing things that we just know because we've been there, we've felt it before.
Right. And we don't have to think about that. We don't have to have our minds blown all the time, but it just is, it's logical, you know, to the fact that time is simultaneous, or that it's an illusion. So is space. And actually Dolores Cannon talks about this, and, you know, she gets all of her information through her clients in their hypnotic states, and from, you know, non-terrestrials talking about that. This is really a mind-blowing. And she says, you know, listen to it, but then let it go, because we'll drive ourselves crazy. That every choice that you make, the alternate choices continue to exist in an alternate version of you in the universe.
You know, sometimes when we talk about these things, my brain is like, the capacity is going zzz, zzz, zzz.
Yeah, it's like, that's too much. That's too much. All right, let's just get back to what I'm going to have for dinner.
Right, the mundane. Yeah, it's like I'm holding it, but it's like close to like collapsing because it's too much. But that's fun too. So
exactly, that's why I said Dolores Cannon's like, but let it go because it's too. Yeah, right. You can't. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I'm sure that this is going to be more commonplace as we go along, and, you know, we just again, it's about the more we experience, the more we just know it, and it becomes a normal part of our who we are in our lives and our experience.
Yes, absolutely. And it is, again, like, to circle back, it's about going back inside. So we shouldn't focus on something as, you know, kind of loopy from our perspective of alternate times and alternate me's out there. Because if we over-focused on that, that would be over-focusing on something external. And then that, again, is not unifying, because unity starts from being unified with yourself and you know, integrated with yourself.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that full circle back to here, because this is what's happening. Yeah, very good point. Well, we've only got a few minutes left. Goodness, is there any last words? Would you like to talk about your free gift you're offering? Anything you want to leave us with?
Sure. The gift that I'm offering is it's a mini class, really, on telepathy. It's sort of like an overview or an introduction to telepathy. I go plenty into depth, I think, but telepathy is infinite. Like you mentioned that earlier. I mean, the extra senses that we have are infinite, and telepathy is the non-physical language, and therefore it's infinite as well. So it's my intention with the class is to bring it into your conversation and bring it into your awareness. And I talk about the ethics of it, and I touch upon using telepathic language with humans and with animals, and a little bit about that I was talking about earlier, about the density and the different perspectives. And what I think is great about it too, right, bringing animals or nature into the conversation. And I say nature because I've had profound conversations, life-changing conversations with trees and a butterfly. Oh my gosh, a butterfly explained to me that density thing. Well, he didn't use that word. I didn't understand that word yet, but anyway, understanding the perspective of someone else, whether it's an animal or a tree or a person, helps us, or even we can't ever fully occupy it as being an individual, but understanding it a little bit better helps us to inhibit ourselves from projecting, which we all do. And again, it's unifying then and being able to take in their experience. So understanding how animals perceive communication, but also just life. I think it's only going to help us to bring that unity consciousness into our lives more fully. So that's the class. It's that's the offering. It's a little mini class, and it's self-paced. It's videos and audio, meditation, and, you know, like a PDF or something like that, with tips and also different things that literal practice, the ways that you can practicing it with a partner or practicing it on your own.
Sounds amazing. Yeah. I'd love to see that myself, because I want to keep fine-tuning my own like understanding and perceptions of the world around me. So that sounds like an amazing offering there.
Oh, good. Thanks. Yeah. I think that we're really comfortable in this, this community or whatever that we're in, communicating non-physically or telepathically with spirit guides and angels. But I think that we need to realize that that's a part of our existence, human to human or animal to animal, the incarnate to the incarnate, which is what we typically are referring to when we talk about telepathy. because it is a part of the ascension. I mean, look at the fact that how we're communicating right now. We're communicating in this way. I think the internet and computers we created so that we can remind ourselves that we're telepathic. It's just a model of it. We just have a machine, and that we're like, well, we can only do it because of the machine. And it's like, but we created the machine. Not me. I didn't.
Right.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have this little symbol that's between us to helps us to believe in it.
Yes. The thing is, I get so excited about this stuff because another one of my speakers brought this point up a few interviews back. It's interesting. So you just mentioned it too. So this is like that connection that's happening. We could not have invented the internet had we not had some portion of it within our own makeup, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, not only, I mean, if you think about, let's say go back 200 years ago, if you just suggested that you could you could throw your voice across the country, you would have just been burned as a witch.
Done.
Yeah.
That is so true. It's really that perspective. And look how far we've come. And I mean, things are only speeding up. So just as a great reference point, that was a great reference point, because 200 years ago, who would have even thought about cell phones and internet and Zoom videos like we're doing now? And so only 50 years from now, I think things are going to look still a lot different because everything's moving quickly.
Even faster. I mean, look at the last even 20 years, how quickly things have moved. 200 years ago, this technology or being able to do this would sound to those people like us talking about alternate me's with the, you know what I mean? The alternate timelines.
Exactly.
It would have been like, oh, that's crazy time.
Sorcery, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the future is just all witches.
There you go. Well, we knew that all along, right? But we're just like coming into like acceptance of it.
Right.
I mean, that depends on your definition of witch, but
no, I know. Not the religious witch. I mean, like, that in the 200 years ago, the witchcraft stuff, what they killed people over.
Exactly.
I know there are people that practice it as a religion or as a spiritual practice. That's not what I mean. It's a joke.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just meant like what the idea of telepathy, the idea of healing, the idea of connecting with our black cat, the idea of nature and herbs and healing, like all that was considered witchcraft, and all that was you could get killed for that or tortured.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like, that's what I meant by the witchcraft. That's like, and that's who we are at our most basic elemental self. So
that was one of the first lives that I recalled after my big opening, was being burned as a witch. And I was also an apothecary. And I was also a single woman who was 27, which is kind of witchcraft in itself.
Right. How dare you?
I recalled all these things. And so I referenced that life in this life a lot. There's a lot of stuff that's why I think it was the first one that I remembered, because there's so many of those themes that I'm following through with right now.
Oh, yes. And I totally get that. I'm the same way. And it's finally time to, step out and use our voice and be in our power and speak the truth and be who we really are. And that hasn't come without some trepidation, but I mean, again, it's that being in integrity and following, who we really are, and being in that alignment, the truth of who we are. That's paramount.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting that you can find all these different ways all the time where you aren't expressing your authentic self. That's about peeling the onion again, where you're like, oh, I am still afraid of persecution or something or other, you know what I mean? Maybe I am still afraid of persecution, but there's something that I'm not expressing that's my authenticity.
Right. And triggers, like the current state of affairs in this country. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of triggers and things that are coming up, I think, for people to look at and heal and to transcend beyond, old fears and things like that. So, there's lots of opportunities. And I could just really keep on talking to you. I guess we're going to have to end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, goodness, thank you so much, Tricia. It has been a delight speaking with you, and so many cool things that we could just keep talking about here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Shae. This is a wonderful project, and thank you for doing this for our beautiful planet and our beautiful universe. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for all that you do too. And it's all of us together, right?
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you one last thing that one of the conversations I had with the tree, My best friend and I actually wrote a children's book based upon that experience. And so the tree, when I was speaking with the tree, it surprised me. And how it goes in the children's book, why such surprise? We're all made of the same stuff. We're all souls in disguise.
Oh, I love that.
I think that essence of the soul in disguise, that's that spark, that divine spark that is the unity.
Absolutely. And I just felt that spark go through me as you said that.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful. Well, what a great way to end the interview with that little verse that you just said. That's really cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for this. It's beautiful.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been totally my pleasure. And I can't wait to, there's nowhere I'd rather be playing right now than in this kind of conversation with people like you.
Me too.
Cool. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Tricia, thank you again. And we'll see you soon. And okay, that's it for now, I guess. I hate to go, but we'll see you again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.